Well, let me get us going. We've got a jam-packed agenda today. We're going to cover a lot. This is the same list that you signed up from, but here's the bottom line. We're going to hit the top of the waves on these topics. So take notes. My goal is that you leave with some actions that you can take, some things that you can do different, that you can immediately put into play to start to get some return out of this webinar. Use your workbook, take plenty of notes in the workbook, and as questions come up, post them in our Q&A. Post them in the Q&A, and I'm going to do my best to answer all the questions at the end of today's session. And if for some reason I don't get them answered then, you're going to have my email address, and so you can email me directly. You can set up a call directly. I'd be happy to help you. So let me kick this off. Let me kick today off with a story. One of my first clients, so I'm dating myself, this was 6 or more years ago, six and a half years ago. I facilitated this session for a CEO and his direct reports, and the topic was about leadership and what is leadership. And one of the gentlemen that was in that group raised his hand, and he's like, Mark, I've got the perfect example. And I'm like, well, boy, I mean, how do you not let this guy go? So I said, well, we'll take it away. And the guy's name was Daryl. And Daryl told me, he said, Mark, I grew up in West Texas. And he said, I always thought that I would be extremely successful. He goes, that's just how we roll in West Texas. And he said, but at the age of 18, I found myself in Dallas, starting a job as a warehouse laborer. He said, Mark, it was undoubtedly the low point of my life up until that point. And as I look back on it, the low point of my life, period. But a series of bad decisions, a pregnant girlfriend had gotten me kicked out of the house, and I had nowhere else to go. And he said that first day at work, there were 8 new employees. And the manager was a guy named Ed Cahaley. And Ed looked at me and he said, son, can you take those pallets and move them to the back of the warehouse? And he said, Mark, he goes, I didn't even know what a pallet was. And he said, when I said that, everybody in the group laughed. He said, everybody laughed except this manager, this guy named Ed Cahaley. And Ed said, well, just come on over here, son, I'll show you. And he started walking me back to the back to show me the machine that could help me move the pallets around. And he said, Mark, in that moment, for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. I felt like maybe this is a place that I can succeed. Maybe this is a place that I can get my life back on track and be able to provide for the family that was coming. And he said from that day forward, he goes, I worked hard for Ed. He said, I was hungry, I was teachable. He said, I wanted to deliver. And he said, Ed, on the other hand, was a great mentor. He said, he poured into me. And he said, over time, I grew to trust Ed. I shared with him my hopes, my dreams, my failures, that my lack of confidence that I had in myself. And he said, Ed listened, and he taught me responsibility. He taught me commitment. He taught me discipline. He taught me how to be a man of my word. And he said, every chance that I had to stay late or work a Saturday with Ed, he said, guess what? I took advantage of that opportunity, because when I was around Ed, even though I was working hard, I was learning and I was growing. And he went on to tell me that 4 years later, the company was bought out, and he showed up one day, and guess what? There was a sign on the door that said, under new management. And he said, I remember I charged back to Ed's office and it was empty. He'd already moved out. And so I barged into the new owner's office. He goes, here I am, this 22-year-old kid. And I'm barging into the new owner's office, and I'm telling them what a huge mistake they made, and they've got to bring this guy back to the company because he's just doing great things. And the new owner looked at me and he said, look, young man, it's our company. We bought it. We're going to bring our own leadership team in, and so you're welcome to stay or you're welcome to go. And Daryl said, in that moment, I made the decision that I was going to go. And he goes, I left that day. And he said, so I needed to go find something else to do. Now, some of you that are millennials won't recognize what I just put up on the screen, but back in the day, people used to go through the newspaper and they used to look at things called want ads. And so that's where Daryl started, and he found a job for a parts manager position. And so he went to interview for the job, and he said, the whole time I'm interviewing, I'm thinking to myself, what would Ed Cahaley say? What would Ed Cahaley say? What would Ed Cahaley say? And about halfway through the interview, the guy interviewing looked at me and he said, you know, Daryl, we've got the warehouse manager job available. Is there some reason you did not put in your resume for that position? He said, Mark, I walked into that company looking for a $45,000 a year job, and I walked out with a $60,000 a year job. He said, I was elated. I bought Ed and his family a gift basket, and I took it over and just to show my appreciation. And it was all because of Ed that I got that job. And he said, the company I worked for grew really quickly. And he said, before I knew it, I was leading a team of managers and 150 people that were ultimately a part of my organization. And he said, the only way I did it was I kept saying, what would Ed Cahaley do? What would Ed Cahaley do? What would Ed Cahaley do? He said, in fact, I even created an award and named it after Ed Cahaley. That's how much Ed was on my mind. But he said, Mark, you know, I was disappointed. Time got away from me, and I learned through the grapevine that Ed had passed and that I had missed his funeral. And so I took time and I sat and I wrote Ed an 8-page letter that he actually showed me a copy of. And he said, I didn't want to just mail it to his family. I wanted to take it over and deliver it. I wanted them to know personally how much this man meant to me and how much of an impact he had made on me as a young man and how much of an impact he was continuing to make on me today. And as Daryl sat there and told me that story, it caused me to reflect and consider how many people like Daryl had crossed my path. And I remember I said to myself, as I'm sitting here watching this guy kind of run my workshop, I said, Mark, you have got to be slower to judge and you've got to be quicker to believe. See, what Daryl's story reinforced in me is the truth that great leadership isn't earned by being an authority figure, by pointing out others' mistakes, by pointing out others' blind spots. Great leadership is earned when you come alongside, when you cast a compelling vision for the individuals you lead, and when you inspire others through your example by respecting them, by believing in them, by listening to them, and by understanding their unique situations. And then thirdly, when you serve others, when you serve the organization, when you serve your peers, as well, of course, as those who ultimately work for you. So today you're going to learn the principles that will not only help you be more successful, but will help you be the type of leader who develops other leaders. So I want you to think a minute for a moment, and we had a lot of great responses up on the screen, and I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to log them all down, but why develop other leaders? I mean, why is it important for you to develop other leaders? And I know as we started, we talked about carrying the torch, assuring that the organization continue to grow, that it can stay aligned with the mission and the purpose of the organization, to ensure that we have a strong team. And because so many people in organizations lack the basic people skills to be effective, it really takes leaders to help teach them those skills. So all great answers. I want to give you 3 to kind of build on that I have found in my work, as I've worked with so many others that have really made the difference as they think about, why should I develop other leaders, and why developing leaders should not just be something that you should do, but that should be something that you must do, that you become obsessed with doing. And let me unpack these a little bit for you. The first one is the law of explosive growth. Now, this came to me from my mentor, John Maxwell, but what I have learned is that leaders are critical to creating disruption or defending against disruption. If you lead followers, If you lead people who lack leadership, your influence stops with those you lead. However, when you lead leaders, your influence multiplies. Leaders have vision, right? Leaders have vision, so they can see how to make things better. Leaders have influence. So that means that they can get others on board with your ideas, right? One of the most difficult things as a leader to do is to cast vision and drive change and get people to follow you, especially as your organizations get bigger and bigger and bigger. But a team of strong leaders can help get others on board with your ideas. And then most importantly, is leaders can inspire change. So while a manager can maintain status quo, it takes a leader to get a team to challenge the status quo. And that's why John Maxwell says if you want to add growth, lead followers. But if you want to multiply yourself, multiply the potential of your organization, multiply the potential of your mission, your purpose, then you must lead leaders. Number two, those, and this is called the power of your inner circle, the power of those closest to you. And the power of those that are closest to you will either help or hinder your success. I bet everybody on this call has already experienced this. You've already seen this take place. And so the goal as a leader is not to draw a following that results in a crowd. The goal is to develop leaders who can become a movement. And then lastly is the pace of change. This is undoubtedly the biggest one that I hear today. And I saved the biggest one for last. And think about this for a minute. When the TV was invented, it took it 13 years to get to 50 million viewers. 13 years. When the internet was developed, it took the internet 4 years. When Facebook came out, it got to 50 million subscribers in 3.5 years. Twitter did it in 9 months. Angry Birds, 35 days. Now, I know this isn't a workshop about how to create games on smartphones, but here's the truth. Disruptive technologies and disruptive industries are transforming how work gets done and how value changes hands at a pace that has never been experienced before. Think about this. Do you really think Ford Motor Company was worried about a technology startup building electric cars in Palo Alto, California? That's probably been 15 years ago. I doubt it. I doubt it. But guess who has the bigger market cap today? That's right, Tesla. In sticking with cars, it is predicted that the self-driving car, which in Dallas, we're already seeing them come, right? They've already announced up in Frisco that we're going to start having self-driving cars that are going to be on the road that we can all use. So these things are becoming a reality. I started talking about this a couple years ago and people thought, yeah, that's 20 years out. But I'm telling you, it's coming today. And it is predicted that the self-driving cars are going to disrupt over 4 million jobs in the next 20 years. Now, it's easy to think about cab drivers, UPS, FedEx, but if everyone floods the grid with self-driving cars, if you and I buy a self-driving car and we drive it into the office, why would we leave it sitting in the parking garage? Why wouldn't we put it out on the Uber network or some other network similar and allow it to make money for us? And if you do that and others do that, pretty soon the price of transportation will come down because of the supply. And maybe people say, I no longer need a car. And if people stop buying cars, this could have huge ramifications. Think about what it does for road and parking construction. How about emergency workers, police, doctors? Think about emergency room workers. If these cars are as safe, and the only way it's going to take off is if they prove the safety, think of the impact it's going to have. Think about banks, credit unions, other financial institutions that finance these automobiles. So here's what great leaders recognize. They recognize that the pace of change is too great to do it alone. And while they may not be able to control or predict where things are going, they can control the quality of the teams that they build. Teams that are made up of individuals that can listen to the marketplace, out-innovate the competition, and consistently add superior value to their customer, regardless of where the market ultimately ends up. And that trait is called leadership. So let's talk about how do we identify these potential leaders. Let's think about this for a minute. So, okay, Mark, you've got me convinced. I know I need to develop them. How do I find these people? Who do I invest time with? Well, the gentleman that you see on the screen here is a gentleman named Dale Carnegie. And Dale Carnegie grew up in just outside of my hometown of Kansas City. He grew up in a town called Belton, Missouri. It's a suburb of KC. And back in the 30s, Dale Carnegie became very successful. He wrote a book, I'm sure many of you on the call have read. It was called How to Win Friends and Influence People. Great book. Even today, it's a great book. And the way that he built his company was he hired independent coaches and trainers to go out and teach his philosophies. And his business took off and it exploded. And a lot of people that did well became very wealthy. There were a lot of millionaires that were working for him. And a millionaire today is impressive. Back in the 30s, it was really impressive. And so it got on the radar of a lot of the big newspapers and magazines. And so one of these journalists came and they interviewed him. And they said, Mr. Carnegie, how have you been so successful in recruiting all these successful millionaires to work for you? Their assumption was he recruited these millionaires. And he said, look, these people weren't millionaires when I recruited them. They became millionaires by working for me. And they said, well, how have you been so successful in developing so many people that could achieve that level of financial wealth? And he said this, he said, men or people, we could say today, are developed the same way that gold is mined. He said several tons of dirt must be moved to get that ounce of gold. But here's the punchline, folks. Listen to this. But he said, but you don't go into the mine looking for the dirt. You go into the mine looking for the gold. You look for what's right. You look for what's good. Unfortunately, our society is so conditioned to look for what's wrong that most people never develop that skill set of identifying what is right. What can I develop in that person? And so I've got a list up here on the board, and it helps, and this is in your workbook too. So what are the gold nuggets that you look for? What are the gold nuggets that you look for? Now, I've given you two lists here. I've said what's most desirable. So what are the traits that I look for that are most desirable? And sometimes it helps to think of what are the traits of the bad apples, those that I wish were not on my team, or maybe that were on my team that have now left, let's hope. If you've still got bad apples on your team, we need to talk about how to move them on, either develop them up, raise them up, or move them out. But sometimes I find with my clients, it helps to kind of think about that. Now, I shared this at the beginning. Some of you may not have been on, but research has shown that 89 to 90% of all turnover, meaning that they didn't work out and were fired, or that they left voluntarily, is due to something called makeup. It's due to their attitude. It's due to their emotional intelligence, their social quotient. Only 10 to 11% of all turnover deals with skills. So while you may have a few people who don't succeed because of skills, I'd bet the majority don't succeed because of some other trait in their makeup. And so the art is to look for what are those traits in their makeup that are the most desirable. Because if we can learn to spot those, what I have found is people can teach themselves the skills. If we get somebody close, they can teach themselves the skills. So let me share with you my list. And I've kind of broken this into two areas. I've got the list I look for everyone, and then I've got my leadership traits. So let me run through these. Number one is hunger. I can't work with somebody that's not hungry to do better. Number two is a willingness to work. Again, if people, the only place that success comes before work is in the dictionary, right? So I need people that are willing to put in the time to make the distinctions to grow and develop. Number three, they've got to be teachable. They've got to be teachable. People that think they've got it all figured out don't last long. Number four is they need to be a connector. Now, what may work better for you is to think about relationship oriented. They need to be able to work through people. And maybe they should have read Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. But they need to be a connector. And then number five, they need to be accountable. And what this means to me is that when they fall short, they don't immediately look outside and point their finger and look for an excuse. What they do is look internally, and their instinct says, what could I have done better? How might I have anticipated that challenge? Why didn't I think of that ahead of time? That's what I mean by accountable. And then for leadership traits, I look for three I's. Three I's. Number one is they've got to have influence. So what does influence mean? Influence means that other people are willing to follow them. And I look for that. So that could be people that are on their team. It could be their peers if they're not managing today. It could be their bosses. Can they get people, do they have the skills to get people to buy into their ideas? I'm looking for the early signs of that. Number two, can they inspire? Can they raise the energy level? You might write this in your notes. It takes emotion to create motion. And if leadership is about taking people somewhere new, having vision and making that vision a reality, I need people that can create some emotion, create some energy, and so that creates the motion and starts to create the momentum to get us to someplace better. And then number three, they've got to be able to innovate. Now, innovate to me means constant and never-ending improvement. That means they are dissatisfied with the status quo. They never get to that point that they think, okay, we've just arrived. And then my T stands for team player. That means they support those that are around them. They support others. Now, I don't want you to just take my list. You've probably got your list, but what are your ideas? And I'm going to share with you two more examples to maybe help you brainstorm a little bit. This guy that I put on the screen is a gentleman named Jack Welch. He was the CEO of GE, and he retired. It was either 2000 or 2001. I don't remember which. But when he retired, he was given a severance package of $417 million. You heard that correct, folks. $417 million. It's a lot of money. Now, the last time I researched this was probably a year or two ago, and it was the largest severance ever paid out. I don't think anybody's passed him, so I'm pretty confident saying it's still the largest severance ever paid out. Now, if you're like me, you may be asking yourself the question, how does somebody get a $400 million severance when they retire? And that's a great question. I asked the same question. Now, here's the answer. The answer is you've got to be really good. You've got to be really good at what you do. And that means you add a lot of value to a lot of people. And Jack Welch made a lot of people very wealthy during his run at GE. So I share that story with you because when somebody's got that kind of a track record and they say something, I want to be listening. You know, what can I learn from this person? So Jack Welch's model for identifying leaders is something that he calls 4 E's and a P. 4 E's and a P. I like it because it's kind of memorable. But here it is. Number one is they've got to have energy. Okay, this kind of gets back to my thing on inspiring. They've got to be able to create some emotion to get motion. Number two, they got to be able to energize others. They got to have that influence that we talked about a minute ago. Number three, now Welch, I love what he says here. He says they've got to have edge. And he defined edge as the ability to make the tough decisions. The ability to make the tough decisions. And then number four is they've got to be able to execute. Right? That means they got to be able to cast a vision and they got to be able to make that vision a reality. They got to be able to execute that plan and bring that to life. And then his P is passion for the mission. passion for the mission. So again, what are the traits that you look for? Write these in your notes. As you get ideas, jot down, because here's what I found. The more clarity you get on what you're looking for in potential leaders, the higher the probability you're going to be able to see it. If you don't really have an idea, if you think, well, I'll know it when I see it, guess what? You're going to continue to be disappointed. So get some clarity around what are those traits that I'm looking for. And when I see them, I'm going to invest. I'm going to put some energy. If they're not on my team, I'm going to get them on my team. And if they're on my team, I'm going to pour some energy into helping them develop. Let me share one more example. I use Southwest because so many people are familiar with Southwest. You've flown Southwest. They're a Dallas company. But here's theirs. They got 3 things that they're looking for. Number 1 is a warrior spirit. And that is a desire to excel, act with courage, persevere, and innovate. Now, I love the way Southwest does this because what they're really talking about is an identity of the person, an identity of the individual. And there's no force in human psychology more important than staying in alignment with our identity. It's just once we get a vision of who we are, we'll move heaven and earth to stay consistent with that vision. So if you can get that idea of people buying into being a warrior spirit, then they're going to work hard to demonstrate that day in and day out. Number 2 is a servant's heart. So I'm going to be a warrior, but I'm going to serve. And this is the ability to put others first, treat everyone with respect, and proactively serve our customers. And so if you know Southwest and you know anything about their history, you know that that warrior spirit was critical when Braniff and Eastern were trying, and Pan Am were trying to put them out of business, right? They had to battle, they had to fight, scratch, and claw to stay in business. But you know that they've become a great airline because they thought they could treat their customers better than Braniff and Eastern in Pan America. And so that's that servant's heart that's allowed them to grow into the airline they are today. And then number 3, and undoubtedly, when I do workshops and I say, and you think of Southwest, what do you think of? Better than half of the audience will always say fun. They're fun loving. They love to have fun. And it's true. They've been that way since day one. So it's about a fun loving attitude, a passion, a joy, and aversion to taking oneself too seriously. And if you talk to Herb Kelleher, the original CEO and one of the founders, he'll talk about how early on they really developed this identity of what they wanted out of the employees, that they wanted to pour into and they wanted to develop. It became, would be hard to even get a job there if you didn't exhibit these. But the more you could exhibit these, the more you got resources and the more you were poured into and developed. So again, what are the traits for you? And the point I want to make here, skills are important. You wouldn't hire somebody to fly an airplane that didn't know how to fly an airplane. But the point is that the reason that people succeed and fail in your organization, the reason that people reach true potential versus being average, very rarely has anything to do with skills. And we're trained to look for skills and then to think the other things are just going to show up. And if there's anything you've taken away from this section, I hope it's that I've got to get some clarity around what is most important to me. What are those traits that I'm going to look for, that I'm going to start finding, and those that I'm going to put the extra effort into developing? When I asked Daryl about Ed Cahaley, and I said, did Ed spend that kind of time with everybody? He said, you know what? Ed cared about everyone, but Ed gave time to the people who deserved it, not to the people who needed it. Let me say that again. He gave time, extra effort as a leader to those who deserve it, not those who need it. So what are you looking for in the people that you develop? Let's talk about culture. The great Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for lunch. Strategy is important. Strategy is critical. If you don't have a good strategy, you're not going to make it. The challenge is that there's been a lot of organizations with a good strategy, but the strategy doesn't get executed because it gets eaten up by the culture. And if you get culture right, you'll be amazed at how it will rise up. Culture, I think of culture like a magnet, right? And if the culture's right, it'll pull people up. Now, if the culture's not right, it'll also suck people down, right? It can also be like a big suction cup, sucking people down to the lowest common denominator. But if we get culture right, it'll serve as a magnet to pull people up. And again, one of the biggest forces in human psychology is that need to remain consistent with our identity, who we think we are. So culture becomes the identity of the organization. And we get it right, and man, it'll pull the best up. And guess what? Those that don't want to be a part of it will self-select out, which is fantastic. Those bad apples will never even begin to rot in our organization because they'll self-select out. So culture, even if you're a frontline manager, or if you're in the middle of an organization, developing that unique culture in your team, supporting the culture of your organization as a whole, and developing that unique culture of your team can really yield tremendous benefits for you. So let's talk about how we do that. So the question here is, what are the behaviors that you need to see displayed in your team members for them to be hitting on all cylinders, for you to be reaching your potential, for you to reach your vision, your goals? What are the behaviors? Because culture is really our habits. What do we do when nobody's looking? What do we do when the boss is gone? What's our instinct? Now, in the beginning, we may have to think intentionally about how we're going to act, but what we want to do over time as leaders is we want to make it instinctual. So I talked about the culture of accountability earlier. Most people's instinct is to look for other people to place blame. Most people don't look inside first. I'm going to argue that we can create that trait if we work hard at it and we're intentional about it, if it's important to us. So that's an example of a behavior that I might see. In fact, I think as I was preparing today, I put some up here on my list. So I put, I look for people that, they take responsibility. That's accountability I talked about earlier. Number two, they get on board. I look for people, I tell my clients, what's wrong is always available. Right? There's a problem with every plan out there. There's a problem with every vision that's out there, right? It takes zero leadership to see what's wrong. It takes a leader to see what's right and to get on board and to help me take what little nuggets of gold are in what's right and help them make it right. I already know all the stuff that's wrong. I mean, there's a million things wrong. I don't need that pointed out. Once we've decided, we need to go forward. So can the person get on board? Number two, do they support, or number three, do they support team members? Because here's what I've learned. Somebody's always having a good day and somebody else is always having a down day, or somebody's having a good week and a down week, or a great month and a down month, right? Business is up and down. Our lives are up and down. Stuff happens. And if we live in silos and we're only worried about ourselves, then we're missing an opportunity to pick up our team members when they stumble. And guess what? They're going to stumble. So I want folks that are quick to come to the rescue, to help them up, to fill their gaps, to pump them up when they have those stumbles. I like fresh ideas, right? Remember earlier I talked about innovation. So how does that show up? Well, they're constantly bringing fresh ideas of how we can move our program forward. So take a minute and write down, what are those behaviors for you? And by the way, this is a great exercise to go back and do with your team after today's workshop. So you can take that workbook, print this page out. This is a great exercise. But write down, what are some of the behaviors that you're looking for? And sometimes I find when I do this with my clients, it helps to think about, what are negative behaviors that I see that I need to do away with? I find sometimes that's a way to get your mind engaged on what you really want, is to think about, what don't I want? And then what would be the positive example of that? Or what do I see happening that's not conducive with the culture I want to build? And then what would be the opposite of that I can think of that would be a behavior that would make that happen? So write a few behaviors down. And you may need some time afterwards to continue to think on this, but hopefully that thinking about what you don't want, what you do want, will help you here in doing this with your team. So now what I want to do in the next column over, right at the top of that, write the word team members. write the word team members. So what I want to do here is we're going to go through and we're going to score your team. And we're going to score them on a scale of 1 to 10. Now, I know you may have team members that are fantastic and you may have team members that aren't so good, but I want you for a minute, I just want you to think about my team as a whole on these behaviors. And a 1 is they never do it. And a 10 is they are pristine. They never miss. They hit on all cylinders on this behavior. Scale of 1 to 10. So if you go through mine, I might have a team takes responsibility. I might grade them a 6, an 8 on gets on board. I might say a 4 on supports other team members. We're good, but we're too self-centered. We're not supporting others. And by the way, by team members, I don't just mean on your team. I mean the company as a whole, right? Are you there to serve? Is your team there to add value? In fact, when Daryl built the Ed Cahaley Award, the Ed Cahaley Award was about, he had a team of 5 managers, and it was about serving people outside of your direct line of control. And I love that. I love that award. So that's what I'm talking about here. Supports team members. And then number 4 brings fresh ideas. So maybe I score them a 3 on that. So where do you think your team is today on these behaviors? So take a minute and jot this down. This doesn't have to be perfect. You can come back and redo it. But I want you to commit to writing in your notebook here. I hope you get more out of the program. And then in the 3rd column, what do you think we're going to score in the 3rd column? Well, you guessed it. We're going to score ourselves. How are we? We're the leader of the team. How are we doing in terms of delivering on these, right? Because that's important, because people do what people see. So if I want my team to take responsibility, yet every time I get a call and we mess something up, I blame it on shipping, or I blame it on another department, or finance didn't get this right, or engineering messed this up, then guess what? I'm not taking responsibility, and my team's going to see that, right? So where am I? And it's important to be authentic with yourself, right? It's just you and the pen. You're not doing this in an open workshop. You're not going to share. I'm not going to ask you to share your results. So be honest with yourself. Where do I think I am on these? So let's talk about this. So maybe take responsibility. Maybe I feel like I do a pretty good job here. I've still got room to grow, but I'm an 8. But maybe on getting people on board, I'm a 6. So I'm a little below where I think my team is. I think they're actually better in that area. Supports team members. God, Mark, I'm going to have to look in the mirror here. I actually need to get out and be a better teammate to my peers around the company. And I'm going to tell you, this, of the ones that are on the list, this number 3, I see this in almost every company I deal with. So if you're tempted to say, well, I'm pretty good here and my team's pretty good here, I'm just going to ask you to think about this. With most of my clients, this is an area of opportunity. And then number 4, brings fresh ideas. Maybe I look at myself as really being innovative here, and I need to get my team up to the same level. So go through and take a look at your scores. Now, on some of those where your score is higher, I want you to underline those, and where your score is lower, I want you to circle them. I want you to draw a distinction between the two. So in my higher, you could put a little up arrow if that's easier for you where you're higher, a down arrow where you're lower. But I want you to think through that distinction. And then we're going to say, so what do we do, Mark, about this? So this is interesting, but what do we do? Well, you guys are asking great questions today, and you're teeing me up. Somebody got ahead of me and saw my slide deck here. But here's the thing. If your score is lower, you need to raise your standards, right? You need to decide that this is important and that you're going to live it, right? Or maybe it's something that you don't want to manage to, right? That's going to be part of your culture, right? Now, if you put it down on your list, I'm going to assume it's something that's important to you. But there could be some areas where you need to raise your standards. You need to get better. You need to hold yourself more accountable. And remember, leadership starts with us first. It's hard to give what we don't have. So if we don't have the discipline to lead ourselves, it's hard to have the discipline to lead others. So this raise your standards. Now, some of you might be saying, well, Mark, who would have anything lower than their team members? Well, the truth is probably everybody on this call. So where do we need to raise our standards? Now, the other question is as well, So what happens if our score is higher? We're doing really well, but our team's not. Now, Mark, now what do we do? Well, again, another great question. Number two is you need to be more intentional about modeling the desired behaviors. So if we get a situation where somebody calls in and we made a mistake, being the leader that immediately takes responsibility, being the leader that challenges our processes, our systems, our thinking. Why didn't we anticipate that? Why didn't we see this coming? Why didn't we get out in front of this issue? And by the way, just a side note, Apple Computer is the most valuable company in the world. My daughter graduated from Ole Miss this weekend, and the commencement speaker was the guy who wrote Steve Jobs' autobiography. For some reason, I just drew a blank on his name. Walter Isaacson. And I read that autobiography a couple years ago, so I was just fascinated by the speech. But if you know anything about Jobs, he designed all his products so they would not need an instruction manual. And what that means is when a person had a problem using one of his products, he didn't say, well, that dummy, why didn't you read the manual? Like so many other companies do. He said, why weren't we smart enough to anticipate that client's needs and engineer that into the intuitiveness of our product? That's one of the reasons that Apple is the most valuable company in the world. It's that kind of thinking, that kind of leadership. So it's intentionally modeling those desired behaviors and using those as teaching opportunities to say, now look, there's a couple of other ways we could have gone here. Now look at how we're taking responsibility, right? It's okay, bring awareness to it so that people can see it and see what we're doing. And then number two is stop tolerating undesirable behaviors. So when you're going around the room in your team meeting and you're having everybody talk about what they got done last week and how they executed against their priorities for that week, when people come up short and they blame it on somebody else as the reason why they couldn't get done what they said they were going to get done, do you tolerate that? Or do you look at them and say, well, who should have taken responsibility for that? What happened that we didn't anticipate that? Our value, we've all agreed what's important is that we take accountability, that we take responsibility. If you don't have those discussions at the moment that that behavior is being displayed, then you're tolerating a lack of that behavior. You're tolerating a lower standard. And what happens when you do that is you get more of what you tolerate. You get more of what you tolerate. So raise your standards and stop tolerating people that aren't living up to the standards that you've set. Coach them up or coach them out, right? But if you want to reach your true potential as a leader, you've got to make these difficult decisions, and it has to do with people. I sat through a workshop yesterday. We went around the room, and I was a participant, which was fun. But we asked everybody there, we had 40 people, and we asked what their biggest concerns were. By far, the biggest concerns were people issues. You know, I don't think I have the right people. My people aren't on board. My people aren't executing our plan. Our people aren't buying. It's the people issues. And as a leader, right, it's about people. Leadership is about people. It's about inspiring. It's about getting people to do things that they didn't think they could do. A manager can manage the status quo. A people can inspire the transformation to go to the next level. So let me give you 4 drivers here of culture. And by the way, that last exercise we went through, go home and do that with your team, or go downstairs. You're already at home. Go wherever you're going to go and do that with the team. I'm going to give you 4 drivers. I've written about these quite a bit. You can go to my blog if you want to learn more. So I'm going to hit the top of the waves here. We've talked about this one: behaviors people do, what people see. We spent a lot of time on this. But systems. You know, what are your systems that you have in place to drive the kind of behaviors that you want? Excellence, as Aristotle said, is not an act, it's a habit. How do we create the habit of being accountable? And I have a program called Cadence Leadership. It's about how do we create a cadence of commitment, right? What am I going to get done? Reporting against what I got done, and then talking about my lessons learned and how I'm going to enhance my plan. If you just think about that cadence right there, and if you lead it right, you can go to my website and look for some blogs on this. You'll learn to ask the right questions, again, to drive that accountability, drive that ownership, drive that creative thinking into your team, into your organization, help you raise your performance. And by the way, to plan for your meetings, when you run your meetings this way, you show up, your team does all the prep work, which is where the work should reside. You need to be focused on the things only you can, should, and want to do. So systems are critical. The third one is symbols. It's simple. A symbol is worth 1,000 words. And a symbol can be as easy as taking a picture of the person that won your values award from the week before, the month before, the quarter before, and putting it up on the wall and letting people see we recognize people that do well. We recognize people that live our values, that live the behaviors that are critical to us being the kind of organization that we want to be. And then the last is stories. Facts tell, stories sell. And stories bring your values to life. A lot's been written on this on my blog, so feel free to go there. Feel free to post questions in the follow-up if you have any questions on this. But here's the bottom line. I've spent a lot of time on culture. And I've told you that, you know, there's no force greater in human psychology than our need to remain consistent with our identity, how we view ourselves. And I said the culture we create is the identity for our organization. So if we want to develop leaders, develop a culture that gets people to aspire up to a higher level of themselves. But here's the truth. People will rarely exceed the expectations of their peer group. People rarely exceed the expectations of their peer group. We see this all the time in the military, where they come out and they're so disciplined, they get into civilian life, and a lot of the disciplines that they had in the military fade. And when you interview them and you ask them why, they say, well, it's just not that important with the group of people that I hang out with now. But why did you do them when you were in the military? Because it was the expectation. It was the peer group. That's just who we were. That's how we behaved. So that kind of power can be yours as a leader. One of the biggest challenges I hear, but Mark, I don't have time. You get more action when you can create that kind of culture that naturally brings people up. It buys you back time. That's what we're talking about with culture. And so hopefully this is giving you some things to think about as you start to build a better culture for your team. So let's close by talking real quickly about legacy. You know, the mark of a great leader is not how your organization performs when you're there, but it's how it performs when you're gone. And so it starts with, one, designing, what do you want your legacy to be? You know, Daryl came and wrote an 8-page letter back to Ed Cahaley's family about the legacy that Ed had left with him. If you were gone and somebody missed your funeral that's working for you today, and they wanted to write a letter to your family, what would they say? What would be in it? What do you want them to think of you as a leader? So it starts first with knowing, what is that legacy? It's like Stephen Covey said, it's beginning with the end in mind. Number two, I got to live it, right? I got to be intentional. I got to raise my standards. I got to be the kind of person that I want to be. And it takes intentional effort because we're all naturally self-centered and we're all somewhat victims of the cultures that we live in. And guess what? Not very many people have very high standards. So we've got pressure around us dragging us down. So we got to set a high standard and decide that we're going to live up to that standard that we've created. Number three, who am I going to invest in? Who's going to carry this legacy on for me? And this could be as you get promoted. Some of you on this call are young. You're like, holy cow, Mark, you're talking this legacy stuff. But this could be when you get promoted. Who's going to carry your legacy on in your team when you're gone? You get promoted. Is that team going to perform better because you're gone and you've unleashed so much potential in your people? Or is it going to stagnate because you were the hero? You didn't develop others. And as a result, the program, the team is not going to continue to thrive. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, is pass the baton. So be a river, not a reservoir. Empower people. Let them take off. One of the things that we're doing with our clients, with senior leaders, is we're encouraging them to take 1 month a year off as they groom their leadership team. It's the only way that you got to pass the baton. And some of us are so hands-on, we can't imagine doing that. Well, if we can't imagine, we're not building the right people around us. They're dependent on us. And while that may feel good, that may give us a sense of security, it's not developing people and building the kind of organization that's going to thrive on after you're gone. So make sure you pass the baton. We covered a lot today. In your workbook should be a keep, start, and stop doing section. And I'm not going to take time to pause on it right now, but I want you to come back and commit, right? Leaders make decisions and then they commit to doing something different. So leaders don't get off this call and jump right into the next call and forget about it. What did I learn that I'm going to take action on? Schedule it, get it in your planner, do something to take a step towards making that action a reality. Maybe it's thinking about your legacy. Maybe it's thinking about your culture, but take some action. And that keep, start, stop is a great way to say, these are things I'm doing now that are working. I'm going to make sure I'm keep doing those, keep being intentional about those. But you know what? I'm going to stop blaming others. I'm just going to stop. I'm no longer going to tolerate that out of me, and I'm no longer going to tolerate it out of others. And I'm going to get an accountability partner that can hold me accountable, because guess what? Our blind spots are sometimes difficult to see. And then the stop doing is, or the start doing is, I'm going to start doing something different. Maybe it's talking about behaviors. Maybe it's talking about those traits. Maybe you're going to start really getting specific. Maybe you're going to go through your existing employees and grade where they are on that list of traits that we put together. What traits do I see in my team today, and which ones don't I see? And can I coach those up, or do I have the right people? Maybe you're going to make some important decisions that are going to help you become a stronger leader. I want to take just a minute to just educate you real quick on our model. We work with executive teams, with CEOs and their executive teams. We work with middle management. Our goal is you might imagine, is to drive time up, to give leaders more time to focus on the things that only they can do, only they should do, and only they want to do. What are the things? And maybe I'll do a priority workshop here in a couple months to help you determine what are those things that only I can do, should do, and want to do. What gives me the most energy as a leader? Well, to do that, I need to push down accountability, decision-making, and problem solving. I need my team to do more. I've never met with a leader yet that's not looking for a way to get their team to do more. So we've got systems to do that. At the senior level, we want to help them focus on those high priority items, the culture. Nothing more important than culture, as you probably picked up on this call: strategic thinking, execution planning. Middle management, we're teaching them the art and the science of leadership, how to create clarity, alignment, execution, how to inspire, how to develop influence, and how to innovate. And then we've got pillars of excellence that we do for our clients to help them in special areas of needs. And we deliver our work through leadership retreats, meeting facilitation, keynotes, quarter day, half day, full day workshops, and then our full immersions and ongoing coaching, which is really where you get the most behavior change. An assessment is a great place to start. So if you have questions, click on the link. I think Toby will send this out, or it's probably in the chat. She's probably ahead of me here. So click on this link and set up some time on my calendar. It's my gift to you. We'll have a 30-minute discussion about whatever's on your mind. You can vent. You can tell me how frustrated you are. You can bring me a problem. We can brainstorm. We can talk sports, although I'm not great at sports, but we can talk sports. Whatever you want to talk about, get some time on my calendar, and I'd be happy to visit with you. Okay, questions. Let me see. Toby has some questions that are keyed up, and Denise has a question. So let me start with Denise's question here. We would like more millennials to be our future leaders. That is a great vision. And by the way, I also know I'm at the bottom of the hour, so if you've got to drop off, I understand. I want to thank you for coming, but I'll stay on until all questions are answered. So we would like more millennials to be our future leaders. We train them up, and then they leave. How can we get more engagement for the long haul so they can truly become our leaders? See, this is the challenge when I do a Q&A like this, is you guys ask me really good questions, but they're really, really difficult and deep, and in some cases complex. But, you know, I think millennials are leaders. And I believe that they bring a perspective that great companies truly value. And so the challenge for us is not to force millennials into our systems, into the way that we lead. The challenge is to create an environment that lets a millennial do their best work. And so a couple things to think about is, number one, is there a strong sense of purpose? Do they understand why they're doing what they're doing? I had a leader, it's been a few months ago, and she said, you know, Mark, I think I've been successful because I focus first on why, then on what. Simon Sinek wrote a book called It Starts With Why. He's got a great TED Talk, How Great Leaders Inspire Action. But the more you can talk about why, that sense of purpose, why their job's important, and getting them to see that and buy into that, I think the better. And then number two is growth. Are you creating environments where people can grow? And if you think back on your career, some of you may be living this now, I hope, but we tend to be the most excited, or the best memories in our career were times when we were doing work that had a high sense of purpose. And number two, we were growing, we were learning new things. So the challenge is, how do we create that environment for these millennials to thrive in? Let's see here. I've got another question. Do you believe everyone possesses the ability to become a leader? And I'm going to answer that question by saying absolutely. I think there's been a lot written. I think there's a lot that can be taught about leadership. And I look at it like this way. You know, there's a few people that are born with natural leadership ability, kind of like Tiger Woods was born with natural golf ability, or Jordan Spieth, who's going to be playing this weekend in the Byron Nelson. Or you could think LeBron James was born with natural basketball ability. So there's people that are born with natural leadership ability. However, all of us can learn to be a better leader. And when I work with new leaders, I really focus in three key areas. I don't know who wrote this. Hopefully they're still on the phone, but I'll. Number one, can they cast vision? Because leadership is about going somewhere different. And so it's a vision for the company, the department, for the individuals, for me, right? It's vision. It's a future state. Number two, and it gets back into those three I's, can they inspire and influence? And there's a strategy to gaining influence that we can all learn to be better. See, so many times we get frustrated because we just want to tell people what to do. The challenge is people want to be heard before they're willing to listen. And so it takes discipline. It creating a culture where people are free to express their ideas and they feel safe doing it for them to start to buy into us. So can we develop influence? Can we develop the ability to get people to want to follow us? And we've got a framework that can help there. And then number three is, can people serve others? And I've just seen this over and over and over again. When people develop the mindset of how can I serve those that are below, beside, and above me, good things happen. Good things happen. And naturally, we're wired to be self-centered. So it takes intentional effort. But anyway, I could get on a rant here, so I'll end it at that. But to answer your question, yes. And if I could help you, I know you gave me a lot of context here around a certain person. I'll keep those notes. But if you want to follow up and have a conversation, I'd love to help you solve that challenge. I'd love to help you solve that challenge. Let me see. Our people do not take accountability and do not follow through on commitments. How can we change that? Again, difficult. There's a lot of moving pieces in this, but let me answer the question this way. I think first and foremost, there's got to be absolute clarity about the outcomes for the job. How do I know if I'm having a good day, a bad day? How do I know if I'm successful in the job? How do I measure that? And the more we can quantify it, now some jobs are harder, I get all that, but the more we can quantify it and make it crystal clear, the better. Because then we can ask the question, are you bought in? Are you committed? Can you deliver on that for me? And that question is powerful, because when they answer yes, guess what? They're making a step towards being accountable. The second thing is the way that you get feedback from them. And I'm a huge fan, I'm a huge proponent of the power of the team meeting. And I want, in the team meeting, I want my team telling me what their priorities are for the upcoming week, what they got done out of their priorities on the previous week, and then what, if anything, are potential challenges that could get in the way. And what you're teaching them there by asking them what they got done is you're teaching them to get things done. You're building the habit of resolving, of getting things completed. When you ask them what the priorities are, you're building the habit of them developing their priorities. Again, I didn't tell them what to do. They're telling me what they're going to do. And then when you ask them what, if anything, could get in the way, you're teaching them to anticipate. And those are powerful leadership traits. So you're building the habit of high performance. You're building a habit of excellence. And so you can Google around my website. I use the term cadence leadership, and hopefully that'll help you there, or set up a call, and I hope to help you. Let's see, we got one more question. So if anybody else has a question, I'll stay here till they're done. Our culture is not bringing out the best in others. What should we do first? That's a good one. Our culture is not bringing out the best in others. So we have a culture that's dragging people down. It's not bringing people up. Well, I think it all starts with vision. Where are we going? You know, in the Bible, it says, without a vision, the people perish. John Maxwell says, people will not have power in the presence if they don't have faith in the future. I've seen it over and over again that when people lose that compelling future, that compelling vision, their sense of their will, right? They get into give up mode. And we see it in sports, right? When people think there's no chance to win, you watch teams crater and other teams take over. The coach's biggest job is keeping faith that they can pull it out, that there's a compelling future. So I think, number one, it starts with vision. Number two, I think it starts with that sense of purpose. So why do we do what we do? And getting people to associate with that purpose. I tell this story of, I was working with a payroll provider, and the person who ran treasury, she said, Mark, all I do is just treasury. Just is such a great word to tell you that there's a potential problem. I just do treasury. And thank goodness I had great leaders in the room, and one stepped up who ran operations, and she's like, do you realize our clients couldn't process payroll if you didn't do what you did and didn't do it accurately? And then sales talked about how they talk about it in every meeting. All of a sudden, she just got this whole new sense of life about what her job was about, and became one of the strong rising stars. Put a mission statement up in her office, started championing the importance of the purpose of what they do for their clients, and tied it to their vision of where they're going as a company and the impact they want to make on their community. It was a beautiful thing. And then number 3 is your values, you know, and or behaviors. As I taught him today, it was our behaviors, but those are anchored in our values. And you may need to think about what are our values? Do we have them? And are they taking it where we need to go? Now, there's core values. Those are who we are. And then there's aspirational values. So core values are discovered. Aspirational values are designed, but you'll lose credibility if you do not make them real. So if you want to read more on this, I wrote a blog called Are You Living Your Values? Toby can maybe tell you, I might be drawing a blank on it, but you can go back and pull that about a client I worked with that put an intentional value strategy in place and really changed the trajectory of their company. So let me see. I think, God, great questions. Holy cow. So great job. Great job. So if there's no further questions, I want to encourage you to take advantage of my offer. Click on the link. I'd love to visit with you. I want to help. And I want to wish you all the best in your journey. And remember, if you want to add growth, lead followers. But if you want to multiply, if you really want to make a difference, lead and develop leaders. So again, thanks for joining. Continue to rise up and always lead with passion.